So
Hmm.
wanted to talk to you about telling the story, what it's like to tell a story through animation as opposed
Hmm.
to writing something that real actors will
Yeah.
do. Um, why you chose animation, and also like what kinds of direction, what kind of visual cues did
Yeah.
you give to the artists that you collaborated with to come up with, and how many like passes did you
Oh man.
have before you came up with this look and this feel?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the main reason why we wanted to do animation was, I joke with people about this all the time. I say, if Hair Love, the exact same story, shot the exact same way with live action, I don't think it would have had anywhere near the impact that the
Mhm.
animated version of it had.
Mhm.
And I think that's because a lot of times when you think about it, animation tends to be one of the most universal forms of filmmaking. Like when you talk to people and you say, "What is your favorite movie from back in the day?" 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a Lion King in there, Beauty and the Beast,
Yeah.
a Dumbo. You're going to get, one of the classic Disney movies or Pixar films kind of in that lexicon. And Karen said something when we won in her speech. She said, animation is the first form of filmmaking that kids are exposed to.
Hmm.
And I think with that being said, there's just something about the medium that makes it universal. Like the reason why Moana and Coco and Into the Spider Verse did as well as they did, again, black films come out all the time, and a lot of times they don't do hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. But animation, it's more of a family thing, and I think it just kind of makes people relax a little bit when they're watching a story that doesn't focus on them because they're used to seeing animals and allegories that are told through all different types of kind of inanimate objects, right? And so for us, the look of Hair Love, you know, obviously there's been a big debate about like kind of the current style of animation and people really wanting that old 2D style back.
Mm-hmm.
For us, because also we didn't have a lot of money, we had to be very creative. And we thought that, 2D would be a more cost effective way to get the story done because hair was such a big part of the story. 2D was just better for us in terms of being able to manipulate it and make it look the way we needed it to look and move the way we needed it to move. A lot of these big 3D, animated features, I mean, like Moana, for example, you're talking like whole teams that are just on the hair,
Yeah. Yeah.
millions of
Hmm.
dollars that are put just into making the hair look right. And we just didn't have those resources. And, I think for us, in terms of the direction, you just pull from like a lot of real world examples. A lot of times, like our other directors, like Bruce Smith and Everett Downing, would like physically record themselves acting out different parts of the scenes, and then we would send those to the animators for reference, so that they would know, like, okay, this is how when somebody says this line, his hand goes up and then it comes down, and then the
Mm.
eyebrows move a certain way. So it's like very technical in terms of making sure that the emotions come across in a certain way. And as you guys know, Black Life is even more specific. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're dealing with animators who may not even be of that particular race, it's very important to really have a team of people that just stay on top of it so it looks authentic.
Just switching gears for my final question. A couple of years ago, it seems like a moment was starting with Moonlight,
Hmm.
Get Out, Sorry to Bother You. These brilliant black films that are coming out, um, critical acclaim, and people actually love them and spent money to go
Yeah.
see these movies and talk about them. I feel like Hair Love, winning an Oscar is like part of that moment. And I wonder, from your perspective, what has to happen for us to sustain that moment?
I think it's like it's funny because I'm sure this question has come up so many times throughout the history of black film. Like you had the black exploitation era. You had the early '90s when Spike Lee and Ernest Dickerson and Reggie
Yeah.
Hudlin and Matty Diop and everybody came through. I think I don't know. I think at the end of the day, like there's never been a time where we've had more outlets to get our work out there. I just think we have to all support our young black voices. You know what I mean? Every
Hmm.
time somebody sends me a link to their reel or they send me a link to their Kickstarter campaign, I always try to support it and back it just because you just never know. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know, back when I was more on the come up, I would have loved to have that same support too. And so I just think all we can really do is just support our filmmakers. I think when people get that foot in the door, we have to pull people in behind us. That's why I think why things like what Ava DuVernay does, where she literally reaches back to people that have done their first indie film or have done a music video, whatever, and gives them opportunities to work in television. TV directing is extremely hard to break into.
Mm-hmm.
And I can probably count 30 different people who got their first TV directing opportunity from Ava, who've gone on to do many
Wow.
more
Wow.
episodes of television directing. So, I think it's going to take people like that are very specific in their intention of bringing people up behind them to really keep this thing going.
Fantastic. Well, I have no other questions. How about you, Mike?
I mean, I think that's a lot to chew on and
It
process, and
really is.
it
Yeah.
feels great to talk about this, especially with you, because of the energy that you've been able to bring, and that, like, I can attest to the fact, like, watching you on social media, that, like, what you just answered in terms of bringing people forward, paying it forward, making sure we're raising the platform and shining a light on all the
Mm-hmm.
black like, you live that every
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
day. And so it's great to hear you say that that's the important thing to do, because you demonstrate it all the time and inspire us to do it as well.
Nah, man. Nah, man. I really appreciate you, brothers, for having me on. Chicago represent.
Yes, sir.
Uh, you know, and man,
Of
I really
course.
love what you guys are doing. Seriously,
Thank you, man.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Matthew Cherry. He
no
is
worries.
at Matthew A. Cherry on Twitter. Of course, his Oscar-winning film Hair Love is out there. Go see it if you have not. It is a beautiful piece of cinema.